Dr. Joel Warsh, thanks for being here. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me on.
I've noticed on social media you are Dr. Joel Gator Warsh. Why Gator? Where does that nickname come from?
It actually comes from my wife. People think it's a Florida thing. It's not a Florida thing. Nothing against Florida. I grew up in Toronto, but her last name's Intelligator. So people started calling me Dr. Gator. They thought it was funny, and it kind of stuck. So that's where it comes from. It's
All
a
right.
wife thing.
What should I call you today?
Whatever you like. I mean, I get called all sorts of things, but Gator or Joel or Doctor, whatever works for you, I'm good with.
Okay, great. I want to start the conversation with this question because I know people are going to ask it. They always do. Whenever I talk to a guest about a contentious issue, and we're diving into a contentious topic today, what makes you qualified to talk about vaccines or to write the book that you wrote, Between a Shot and a Hard Place? I know you're a pediatrician, and as a pediatrician, I'm sure you've administered countless doses of vaccines to your patients over the course of your career. I'm sure you still do, probably still do. But you're not an immunologist, right? That's what people will come out and say. Like, who are you to talk about vaccines? Who are you to write this book? And why should people care what you have to say about vaccines?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think like with any sort of product or medical product or book, there are many angles that you can come at. I mean, certainly an immunology background is very important. That's a big piece of it. But for a book about vaccines, to me, I'm someone who gives vaccines every day. I'm someone who gets asked questions about this every single day. It's a really important topic to me. It's really important to my patients. And I think that it's really important to have a voice in this conversation because there just are not a lot of unbiased, middle of the road discussions when it comes to vaccines. I mean, for me, if I go back, I guess the reason why I wrote the book is kind of historical for me. I did all the regular training, trained at a wonderful program at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, very Western, did a master's in epidemiology and health research before that. And at that time, I was really not thinking about vaccines. I mean, you get your training on vaccines, you learn about the great things that they can do, the horrible diseases that we had in the past and how they're not around anymore. And vaccines are the main thing that has done that. And so, yeah, like here are your vaccines, here's your schedule, go do it. And that's really all that you're taught or the main things that you're taught. And I didn't really think much of it until really meeting my wife, who is naturally minded. And it really opened up my eyes to a little bit more alternative health. And I've always tried to balance the best of both worlds. I'm not against modern medicine, but I did try to incorporate integrative medicine. And as a practitioner doing integrative medicine over the last decade, more and more people came to my office having questions about vaccines. And it really required me to open up my mind to what was going on with vaccines, learn more about it, and do the best that I can to answer these questions. And the more questions that I got, especially from social media and in the office, the more I realized that I didn't know. And so I had to research more and more. But ultimately, with COVID, it was so frustrating. It felt like everything was so censored. And I decided that I really did want to learn all that I can to really have this discussion. And so that's what led me to write the book, because I wanted to do a deep dive to really get into it and to answer the questions you're getting all the time. Like, what should I read? How should I learn more about this? I'm super confused. And everything in vaccines seems to be very one-sided. So that's what led me to write the book. And I don't think there's one person that's exactly specifically qualified to do it. I think many people are reading many different angles.
I love that answer. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I personally hate the expert policing that we're seeing a lot of these days. I just think it's a stupid argument. It's like, did the person do a good job in their research? Were they honest? Are they continuing to be honest? Are they willing to change their mind? And most importantly, if you criticize them, like, what evidence do you have that they were wrong? Like, let's talk about specific critiques of someone's point of view rather than just attacking them as a person and resorting to name calling and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think that's a great answer. And yeah, it's interesting to hear about your personal connection to this topic. Was there a first thing, like when you started to open your mind up to having a more balanced viewpoint on vaccines? Because, as a physician, I'm sure you were taught, like, they're great, don't question them. Was there a first thing that you learned that really kind of shattered the preconception that you had about vaccines?
Well, yeah, and I wouldn't say that we're taught not to question them. I just don't think that you even think about that. Like,
okay.
you're just taught what you taught, and you kind of think that vaccines are the best thing ever. and you don't really ever hear the other perspective or another perspective. So you don't really think about it unless somebody brings it to you. So I think for me, it was just patients, right? It was patients coming in, patients having questions, patients saying they had this kind of reaction or that kind of reaction, or they wanted to talk to another doctor and they were unwilling to discuss it with them. And the more of those that started to build up, the more it really piqued my interest. Like, why are doctors not talking about this? Why are they unwilling to have a discussion? Why are things being censored? Like, none of that made any sense. There was no reason that, in my mind, at that point, that we should be censoring anything. Like, I believe in science, and I believe we should be able to talk about everything. We should be able to have discussions, and I don't think particularly that I'm right about everything, right? I don't think that makes sense. Like, I'm trying to present the best information that I can find, and I'm always happy to change my opinion. And I've said this many times. Like, if somebody read my book and they feel like something's wrong, like, send me information. I'm happy to change my opinion. My opinion is not like, go get all the vaccines or don't do any. It's, I want kids to be the healthiest possible, and I'm trying to figure out what that is based on all the questions and the gaps out there. So yeah, I don't know if there was one specific instance. I think it was a buildup over the last decade, and also just gaining more and more comfort that I can speak to this and should, because it was such a controversial topic. And if I had come out with this 5 years ago, probably would have been completely censored. So it's a different time, which is good, but ultimately I just decided that I needed to do it.
Yeah. How do you like to enter into a conversation about vaccines? It's still such a charged topic for a lot of people. So let's say you're talking to, I don't know, your parents or in-laws or professional colleagues, maybe other doctors who fall into the camp of, hey, the science is settled, vaccines have been proven, they're safe, we shouldn't question them because that might promote hesitancy, it could kill millions of people, right? We don't want to bring back these horrible diseases. They've essentially made up their minds already, but maybe they're open to hearing what you have to say. How do you crack the door open? Like, where do you like to start to open people up to, like, oh, it's maybe a little bit more nuanced, a little more balanced, a little more complicated than all good or all bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think you introduced that very well, and that's tends to be a similar manner to me. I mean, I always like to talk about how I'm not against vaccines. I think that kind of deflates the situation a little bit or decreases the intensity. Like, I'm not opposed to vaccines. I don't think they're all good or all bad. I think that for me personally, I believe in informed consent, which really is the basis of medicine. And I think every doctor agrees with that in theory. And in my office, we have patients that I do all the vaccines on the regular schedule. Some do a slow schedule, some don't do it. I don't believe in forcing people to do things. I believe in informing them and educating them, discussing it, and helping them to come to a conclusion. But ultimately, it's up to them to decide what they want to do. And to me, that is a good segue into having a discussion, because I feel like a lot of, especially practitioners, they think when they get into a conversation about anything vaccine related, it's like, oh, you're a crazy anti-vaxxer, you're totally against vaccines, you want people to die, you want people to get these diseases, which none of that is true. I'm not against vaccines. I've had vaccines in my life. We give them in my office. It's just that I believe we should have conversations. And when I came out with this book, I thought I was going to have all sorts of craziness and all sorts of animosity and all sorts of mean-spirited attacks, which thankfully has not happened, which is great. I think that maybe it's coming from that angle that's been really helpful. I mean, one part of it is the world's changed a little bit and we're open to talking about it a little more. So certainly that's helpful. But I've had many conversations now with doctors and people that have listened to me speak, and probably for the first 5 words were very concerned that what I was going to say was going to be very much against what they feel or going to be putting down vaccines. And then I think when you listen, especially if you put things in a scientific perspective, like, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here are the questions that I have, here's the questions I've received. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, here are the questions, like, let's talk about this more. Most people are open to that if they actually will listen and not just read a headline. But oftentimes it's like, crazy anti-vaxxer headline, and you don't ever read past it. And I think once you can get past it, that helps. And that's why these kind of platforms really help, because you can actually get in a conversation, and it's hard to, you get a good sense of somebody by listening for an hour or two, as opposed to 2 sentences or, social media posts or something.
Totally. Or a headline taken out of context, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to talk to you. I'm about halfway through your book, and you've surprised me on both sides of the argument so far. Like, oh, I'm convinced that, some historical vaccines have maybe been a lot more important for eradicating scary diseases than I thought. Like, I'd almost shifted too far that way, where I'd learned like, oh, sanitation and just health and nutrition and things like that had mostly taken down the severity of some of these scary diseases. But they were still common diseases that everybody got, and vaccines eradicated some of them. I would love to hear you speak more to that in a second. And then on the flip side, like learning even more about, I don't know, just vaccine safety testing and this kind of house of cards and that whole thing. I'm just like, Jesus, yeah, this is a really interesting topic. It's really not cut and dry either way. I want to kick off, going into more depth into vaccines. I want to kick that off by talking about a few facts that everyone should know. And I want to cover that on both sides of the argument, starting with like the undeniable efficacy of vaccines. Like, what are some of the amazing things they've done for humankind? We no longer have smallpox outbreaks, things like that. What are some of the things that everyone should know?
Yeah, you frame that really well. And if for those that don't know or not super aware, I mean, the big argument that a lot of individuals have is, vaccines are the best thing ever. The reason why we don't have these diseases anymore is totally because of vaccines, and millions of people were dying back in the day because of these diseases. And then we started the vaccines, and that's no longer true. And the reality is that's not true, right? It's not because of the vaccines. A lot of these diseases were very much on the decline before any vaccine ever hit the market. So there were things like, the diphtheria and tetanus and pertussis. All these things were quite bad. Measles back in the day. I mean, they were not great, but they were very much on the decline in terms of their mortality well before those vaccines came out. So you can't credit vaccines with everything. I mean, smallpox, it seems like it was very successful, and there were a lot of smallpox cases, and after the vaccine, there weren't anymore and haven't been in a long time. So you could probably credit smallpox going away with the vaccine. But for most of the other diseases, if you look at the mortality rates, they were next to nothing or very low before a vaccine came out. So,
and is that because of basic sanitation? We're not like shitting in our drinking water anymore.
Yeah, I mean, they're just exactly. There are just so many things. So, we're much better at sanitation. We understand what diseases are. We have antibiotics. We have hospitals or better hospitals. We can take care of people better. So, I think we're just all around healthier. We have better nutrition, and that is a huge factor. Because generally what you see is someone who has comorbidities or is not as healthy has a much higher risk of having an issue with any sort of disease. We saw that during COVID as well. So that was just true back then. And given the general health of the population improved so much during that time frame in the early 1900s, late 1800s, you saw those diseases plummeting. But like you said, a lot of the diseases were still around. Like there were still hundreds of thousands or millions of cases of measles. There's still lots of chickenpox. Lots of things were still around. They weren't killing as many people, but they could still make you very sick. Bad pneumonia put you in the hospital. And after the vaccines came out, you did see a lot of these diseases go down to near zero. So you can't just credit, I think, sanitation and nutrition with everything. The best example, I get that one in the book, is chickenpox. We all, for over 20 or so, you grew up, everybody had chickenpox. I mean, that was around. It wasn't. Yeah,
I remember the oatmeal baths, and I remember my friend even like
parties.
my parents' friend even had my friend come over so that he would get chickenpox, so that they didn't have to worry about shingles later on or whatever. Yeah,
right. So it was around, right? And we brought out a vaccine, and you don't really see it anymore. So I mean, that's what I think is true with a lot of these diseases, that the vaccine did bring it down to next to nothing. So it did continue that decline, which was already on the decline. Now, there are reasonable questions around, if we never brought out a vaccine, would we still see this massive decline anyways? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, because we did have vaccines and we did bring them down to very low rates. But if you look at something like rheumatic fever or tuberculosis, that was killing and causing a lot of issues for many people 100 years ago. There is no vaccine for those that we use commonly today, and you don't really see much of it anymore. So if there had been a rheumatic fever vaccine or tuberculosis vaccine that we were using every single day starting 50 years ago, would we say, oh, it's the vaccine that did it? We would, right? We would say that. So it's hard to know without not having them. But ultimately, I think it's both, and there's nothing wrong with saying that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay. And then on the flip side, so you've already spoken to this a little bit with decreases in mortality rates before vaccines, but in addition to that, for the people that are staunchly pro-vaccine, or maybe they're neutral, they've never thought about it, they've never cared, they've never looked into the topic, they assume vaccines are effective and thoroughly safety tested and things like that. What are some facts on the other side that everyone should know? I have a favorite one that I can share in a minute, but I want to let you go first.
Yeah, well, I think most people would be surprised at the actual safety testing that we have. I certainly was. I feel like we get the messaging through public health that vaccines are the most thoroughly tested products that there are on the market, and they're extremely well tested, and we have all these placebo controlled trials, and we know they're safe, and that's just kind of the mentality that we have. And the reality, when you actually look at the vaccine research, especially for the vaccines on the current schedule, is a little bit different. I mean, yes, we have studied these things. You can't say that a vaccine is on the market. It's never been studied. Of course, it was studied. But the research, by and large, is done by the companies. It's done in the most self-serving ways possible. And many of the studies are not conducted against what most people would actually consider a placebo. Most people think of a placebo as an inert substance, as salt water or saline, and you would think that that's the way that they would study vaccines initially to make sure that they're safe. And the reason being because that gives you the best look at safety. You're doing something that's inert and therefore it doesn't cause any symptoms in the body or doesn't cause any reaction versus the product like a medication or a vaccine, and you see whether there's a difference. That's the best kind of research you can do. And that really wasn't done in most vaccines. So they all use a placebo, air quotes, but in many of these studies, the placebo is actually another vaccine, or it's the vaccine that just doesn't have some of the parts in it. So you get a relative safety. And why that really matters is if you have, say, looking for seizures. Well, if you have vaccine A versus vaccine B, both cause 10 seizures, then you say, oh, it's safe because both cause 10 seizures, 10 in each group. But if you had the best study, 10, A, B, and C, so vaccine 1, vaccine 2, and saltwater, you could have 10 seizures, and 1. And you can see how that's a really different study. And most of the vaccines were never studied in that way, especially if you go back a long time ago to the initial studies. When you're in the 1940s, 1950s, 1930s, they didn't do research like we did today. I mean, a lot of the studies were small, maybe just a few days. Maybe it wasn't randomized or blinded. It was like, oh, we give you a vaccine and we watch you for a couple of days and we see how you do. Some of the studies, you'd think they were all like hepatitis B. You'd think that you're giving it to newborns. It was studied hundreds of thousands of kids for years. Well, no, it's a couple hundred kids, like 100 kids, and for a couple of days, like 3-5 days. For safety actively. So that is not
varying ages, right? Like some of them are 18-year-old kids, and then they're giving this to one-day-old babies, assuming it's fine.
And that's not my opinion. That's the safety data that's in their vaccine inserts. So you think that there would be more. I thought there was more. I couldn't find it. I mean, reading Aaron Siri, who's a lawyer who does all this, research and does a lot of the Freedom of Information Act. Same thing when he went through it. He was like, what? And he Freedom of Information Act about things like hepatitis B, like there has to be more, and nothing was ever given to him. So I mean that is what it's based upon, and that's wild to me that we're giving kids with that kind of safety data and that kind of background history. Doesn't mean it's unsafe. It just means like that's what we're basing, and we're assuming these things are so heavily studied and safe, which is just not true.
Yeah, my takeaway is like, okay, it's reasonable to be raising an eyebrow, to be asking questions. It doesn't prove anything either way, but like, I would have thought that things were a little more robust than this if we're going to start giving these things to every single kid and even mandating it in some cases where like, in the state of California, you have to get all your vaccines on the childhood schedule in order to go to school. Things like that.
And can I add that? Because again, I think you made a great point there. It's not about saying that they're unsafe, right? You can't make that claim necessarily without the right research to have that claim. But it is reasonable to ask questions, especially as we're getting more and more vaccines, especially as things in some states are mandated and required for you to go to school. And when more and more people have questions and concerns, it should be completely reasonable to say, all right, well, here is the research that we have done. I don't consider that adequate or enough. Let's get more. Let's get more. Let's look into it. Maybe ultimately we're going to find that we agree, with what was found before with the conclusions. I think we have a good understanding that, let's say, the hepatitis B vaccine works and decreases your risk of hepatitis B. I don't think that's really in question. But the question we have to be asking is at what cost? Because we have to be looking at, we do want to reduce your risk of hepatitis B, but at what cost to the rest of your health? How does that factor in? And I don't think we know the answer to that question. I don't think we understand the long-term risks of most of these vaccines. And I think that's a hugely important piece that we're missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hepatitis B is a really great case or interesting case, an example, because as far as I understand it, you contract hepatitis B the same way you get like HIV or AIDS. You get it from sex, you get it from intravenous needles. dirty needles, things like that. And babies, the mother is tested for it before she gives birth. So if the mother's negative, and there's basically no situation or, just it would have to be the most freak weird situation for a young child to encounter this disease. And so why are we giving it to little babies if there's any risk at all? It kind of like skews the, it's not the same as like measles or some of these other things.
Right. That's correct. I mean, the main pathway you get it is through blood or sex. The major concern for a newborn is if mom has it, passing it on to the baby during birth. So that's certainly a real risk. And if mom has it, then it's completely reasonable to think about that, of course, and consider the vaccine at that point. But other than that, is it possible you can get hepatitis B? Yeah, it's possible somebody could come by and bleed on you, or you could touch something that with blood, and you can get like that. That's possible. The test could be wrong. You thought you didn't have hepatitis B, but you did. They forgot to test you, and you didn't know. I mean, these are all possible, but again, it's super, super, super rare. And that's what informed consent is. I mean, that's what you're supposed to tell people. Like, look, okay, you've been tested. Here are the risks your baby could get it. It is theoretically possible they could get it. And some people might say, what, I want zero risk that my kid's going to get hepatitis B. All right, cool, get the vaccine. But if you're okay with the 1 in a million risk or whatever it is of your kid getting hepatitis B, or maybe more than that, then it just should be offered. And you can say, well, okay, you could do it on day 1 of life, or you could do it later. You can do it at 2 months, or you could do it at 2 years, or whenever later. And that is informed consent. And that's what I think we should be doing. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to be requiring everybody to get hepatitis B on day 1 of life.
Mm-hmm.
So many people decline that. It doesn't make a lot of sense now that we test everybody. And I think as long as you can have this nuanced kind of conversation, it's not about being against this vaccine. The reality is that 97% plus, like almost 99% of hepatitis B cases are no more because we do this vaccine. So it actually works very well. Like, we used to have a lot of cases. We don't know where people always got it from. But that still doesn't mean you necessarily have to give it to a newborn baby on day 1 of life. Maybe that increases your risks of a few things later in life. And maybe if you did it at 2 years old, that would minimize those risks. You still get the protection from Hep B, but you minimize your risk from the vaccine. That's not an unreasonable question to ask. Those are the questions we should be asking. Because again, it goes back to, we want the most protection with the least harm. And if you never assume any sort of harm, you're never going to make things better. And there's nobody making vaccines better right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's such an important thing. Like, if we had been iterating on vaccines for the last 30 years and trying our hardest to make them safer, they might be very different, and it might be a no-brainer for everything, but that's not where we're at. I want to double click on placebos. You mentioned briefly that, some vaccines are often the standard practice is to test vaccines in these safety trials against other vaccines, which I'm sure some people listening raised an eyebrow at if they didn't know that. And you give a great example in your book about the MMR vaccine. So this is measles, mumps, rubella. It's one of the most common ones that everybody gets as a kid. I'm sure I got it. And you lay out this kind of house of cards, you call it stacking turtles. You give this great analogy in your book, but it's just this crazy thing going all the way back to like the 1940s, where the current one was tested against the previous one. Okay. The previous one was tested against the one before that. Okay. The one before that was tested against the previous one before that. And all the way back to like the initial test was in the 1940s. It would have been considered probably unethical by today's standards. It wouldn't have been robust and, what we consider like a legitimate safety trial by today's standards. And it's this really bizarre house of cards. And so long as there hasn't been increased risk from one vaccine to the other, the company can say, hey, this doesn't increase your risk at all, you're fine. Do you want to talk more about that? I know I'm kind of like spewing it all and kind of spoiling it, but I just thought that was such a fascinating example.
It's such a great example. And I think, measles, the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, it's maybe even a little more complicated than DTaP. So I'll just do that because I think it's much more simple to kind of understand the concept is. So there's the current DTaP, is diphtheria, tetanus, acellular pertussis. The original was DTP, whole cell pertussis. So that was the original DTP. That was what was around in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And then we switched over to DTaP later, like in the 80s, 90s. But the DTP vaccine was studied, but the DTaP, the new one, was studied against the old one, the DTP. But the old one was taken off the market for safety concerns. And so we don't do DTP anymore because there was concerns about encephalitis, inflammation of the brain, seizures. And so they decided it was too risky. They took it off the market. They made a new vaccine, but you're studying the old one against the new one. So it's a relative safety. And so then you say, oh, well, is DTaP safe? Well, yeah, it's safe relative to the old one, but are they both unsafe? That's the question. And again, it is different. Presumably they change it to make it safer, which is great. But when you're studying things in that way, as opposed to against nothing, it gives you a relative safety. And you wonder, does a kid who has, if there's a 10% serious risk in the trial, if both groups have 10% serious side effects, well, do 10% of kids have serious side effects just day to day? Or is that because both groups got a vaccine and that creates a lot more problems? And that it's a huge question. It's super important because do you want kids to get whooping cough and die? Of course you do not. But do you want kids to get whooping cough and whooping cough vaccine and get a seizure? No, you don't want that either, right? Like we want both things to be true. And there's even studies from other countries where they're looking at kids and they're looking at the DTP vaccine and it shows increased all-cause mortality. So the kids that were getting the vaccine in some of these studies had an increased chance of death versus kids that got nothing. These are the kind of things you have to follow up on. This is not fringe research. These things have been repeated. They've been discussed many times. Not every study shows that, but it's like you can't just assume that more is better or every vaccine is good. If you protect against, diphtheria, but then everybody dies from the vaccine, well, that's not good, right? Like, right. Sometimes you might not be able to protect against diphtheria, or you want a better vaccine. Like we had a rotavirus vaccine. It was causing intussusception, blockage of the intestines. They decided it was too risky. They got that one off the market. They made another one. You have to have that lens. And ever since 1986, we don't have that lens anymore. In 1986, they took liability away from these companies, and there's now no reason to make their products better. So you can't sue them. And so why are they going to do a study to look at problems? Why would they try to find a problem in their own product to take it off the market? They're not going to do that. We have to do it. They have no incentive to make their products better.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you share that. So that was the fact that I was going to share that was kind of the first big, it just kind of shook me out of my worldview or out of my preconceptions about vaccines when I learned that vaccine companies are completely immune from liability and have been since 1986. I'll share my understanding and please fact check me on this, but it was the Reagan administration, and basically that administration went to these vaccine companies and said, hey, we want a lot more vaccines. We want to make sure all these kids are getting all these vaccines. And the vaccine companies said like, well, hey, we'd love to do that, but these lawsuits that we're getting from vaccine injuries are going to bankrupt us if we make more of these things. And so rather than the government saying, okay, well, let's focus on making these vaccines safer and reducing rates of injuries, they just said, okay, we'll just make you immune from liability so you can't get sued. And, outside of cases of like gross negligence and things like that. And if people do have injuries, then they have to submit a claim with the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which is a government program to try to get compensation. And it's pretty hard to get your claim accepted for various reasons that we can talk about. But I learned that and I was just like, yo, like that's pretty sketchy, Like the analogy I like is, imagine if, for people listening, imagine if the government went to Boeing and said, hey, we need you to make more planes. We need more people flying. And Boeing was like, well, we'd love to, but we keep getting sued for all these plane crashes and we're going to go bankrupt if we make more of these planes. And the government's like, oh, don't worry about that. We'll just make you immune from liability. Like I probably wouldn't fly on a 747, I'd probably drive or like at least very carefully analyze the benefit risk ratio. If I had to fly somewhere, I'd really think about it. So it's kind of where we're at with vaccines.
No, you laid that out perfectly. I mean, it's a perfect analogy. And it is so wild. And again, it's like when I'm in medical training, I didn't know any of this. Like, why would any of us know this? But America and kind of capitalism, it's built on checks and balances, right? And the real balance in America in general is getting sued, right? And I mean, there's way too many lawsuits in America. That's one other problem. But like, that's the thing that keeps companies in check. Like, they know that if their product causes harm or has issues or they don't do a good job, then they're going to get sued and they're going to go bankrupt. And with any other medical product and medication, they oftentimes will do years and years and years of trials to make sure that there isn't some sort of unknown problem that might pop up in 5 or 10 years. Because if it does pop up, then they're going to get sued for billions of dollars. And so they would like to do everything possible to make sure that they're not missing something, because the more things that they can identify, the more they can label. And if they label it, then they have some immunity because they can warn people about it. Right? But with vaccines, they don't have to do any of that because they have immunity, and they needed immunity because so many people were suing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else needs that. Like we're basically saying this is causing problems. I mean, which is, I don't think any medication is not going to cause any issues. I don't think anybody doesn't think that a vaccine couldn't cause an issue, but it's causing so many that we're going to see companies go bankrupt. And most of them did. Most of the companies that were making vaccines stopped making vaccines in the 80s because they were getting sued too much. It just wasn't worth it for them. So that was the solution. And I get it. I mean, they wanted to make sure that people still had their vaccines. So that was their solution at the time. But the unintended consequence of that is, if you give a company a liability shield, you now take away their incentive to find the problems. You give them full incentive to say, let's do everything we can possibly do to not find a problem, and let's get our product on the schedule. Let's get it approved, and then everyone in the country is going to have to do it, and everyone around the world is going to have to do it, and we have a captive audience, and they can't sue us. So even if there's a problem with it, then they can't sue us, and anything that comes up, we'll just say, no, we can't prove that. Right? And that's where we're sitting at today, where we have these products that are unique to everything else on the market. You can't sue them, so they have every incentive to get a product on the schedule, give it to you, and they don't have any incentive to make sure their trials are robust or the best possible for safety. And that is a big issue for us, who we're asking people to say, all right, let's do more vaccines, let's continue. And if we don't talk about this and we don't identify it now, well, back then, before this, there was just a couple of vaccines, right? Just maybe you might be getting 5 to 10. Now you're getting 30 plus, right? And what is it going to be in 5 or 10 years? Are we going to add another 10, another 20, another 50? And if we're not thinking about safety, then we are going to find out that there is a problem if there isn't already. Too much of a good thing can always cause an issue. Everything's has a U curve, and it's like you can't just give 1,000 vaccines, right? There is a point where something is too much. And I think we're hitting that point now. And we have to prioritize. We have to think. We have to organize. We have to see if we can do things in a better way. Maybe we can drink some more of the vaccines. Maybe we could do them in a different format. Maybe there's some ingredients in there that are problematic. I don't know. But given we have a chronic disease epidemic, we should be thinking maybe vaccines have something to do with that. And let's see if we can minimize that if possible. Or alternatively, let's get the best kind of research to show that it has nothing to do with it. And given we have this huge uptick in concern around vaccines, that's going to be the kind of research that's going to make people more confident to do it. So we shouldn't be fearing the best kind of research. We should be trying to get it.
Right. And we shouldn't be shaming and trying to silence people who are asking reasonable questions. Like, we're not going to shame away hesitancy. If we want people to be more trusting, we have to do really good science and prove to them that these things are safe and they're not causing, autoimmune issues or whatever people are worried about.
I mean, and I think it's very important to say, like, the hesitancy is the highest it's ever been. There are the most kids that are fully unvaccinated, the most kids that want exemptions or families that want exemptions. There was just a study in the Wall Street Journal that's 1 in 6 parents are not following the regular schedule at this point. So, like a little under 20% are either going slow or not doing any. 50% of parents that were asked said they don't trust the vaccine rules. They don't trust the government. They don't trust that vaccines are safe. Like, that's that's not like a fringe thing. That's half of people. So we have a big problem.
Yeah. And where I kind of fall, just in case people are curious, I don't consider myself anti-vax or pro-vax. I think I'm similar to you in that, like, I don't know, I just look at some of this stuff and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. We should just do things that make sense and are best for everybody. And I look at the shielding of liability, and companies did take advantage of that. It's not like they did. Like, now there are so many more vaccines on the childhood schedule. Again, in some cases, kids are mandated to get all these vaccines if they want to go to school, things like that. And yeah, like when I was a kid, I was born in 1989. So what do you think? I probably got like 10 different shots or 12 different shots or something like that.
Yeah, we had about 3 before 1986, and you got a few of those. You had the DTaP, polio, and measles, mumps, rubella. So that was in the late 80s, early 90s, a bunch of the other ones started to come out, but a lot of us never got those. So yeah, you probably had 3 vaccines and, maybe a couple of each one, maybe a couple other ones.
Two or 3 doses of each. Yeah.
Yeah.
And nowadays kids get like 30 to 40 different shots.
Yeah. I mean, it can be, it depends how many flu shots you get, if you're getting COVID shots, but it can be dozens for sure.
Yeah.
Many more than it used to be, which, part of that's good. I mean, we're protecting against more diseases, so it's not all bad. But again, it's weighing the risks versus the benefits, and also having honest discussions about cumulative effects and cumulative risks, which we never have.
And that's the other thing, right? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that the cumulative risk is a huge question. It's really important to understand what all these vaccines are doing to us, not just in the good, but also in the bad. Even if you're going to say it's 1 in a million kids that have a serious side effect from a vaccine, which I don't think is true. I think it's more, but let's just say that's true. But if you're getting 30 vaccines, it's 1 in a million times 1 in a million times 1 in a million. I mean, that number quickly adds up, and now you're looking at a serious reaction in 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100,000. And that number quickly starts to add up when you're doing multiple vaccines. So these are important things to talk about, because no doctor wants to create harm. No doctor wants to hurt a kid. No doctor wants to give a kid a vaccine and then that triggers asthma or allergies or whatever. So that's not what we're doing. But if we don't ask these questions, then we're never going to know if they have anything to do with that or not.
Have you come across any research that looks at the synergistic effects, cumulative effects of all the different doses that kids get these days?
So there's definitely nothing for all of them, because there are many vaccines that are new. I mean, we just added RSV, COVID in the last couple of years. So there's nothing specific. I mean, the kind of research that you need that's the most definitive would be vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. So having those kind of comparisons, which we really don't have at all. So we don't have the best kind of research. You certainly have some studies that use epidemiology, so looking at databases and kind of looking back and looking at maybe more vaccines that kids get, but realistically, we just haven't. We haven't looked at the whole schedule. We don't look at things in that way. And generally, when the vaccines come out, they're studied for that vaccine. So they're not necessarily studied against all of the vaccines. You're looking at like the whooping cough shot versus the old whooping cough shot, and that's what you're studying. You're not studying it against all the other vaccines. And you're just looking at that one. Maybe they're getting a couple of their other vaccines in that study, but that's not the point of the study. You're not researching that thing. So it's really important that we do that. We have to do the proper studies, and we never did.
Mm-hmm. And then same thing, same question, but with long-term effects. Like, have we ever done any, what you see as robust research on what happens to you over the course of a lifetime? I mean, you mentioned the one study where childhood mortality or all-cause mortality went up. With the DTaP, I think you said.
Yeah, but even that was only a couple months.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anything long term, like anything that looks at like, hey, is it possible that these 40 doses are causing skin issues, autoimmune issues,
nothing's even close to what we would want. So there are some studies that kind of ask that question, not really looking backwards, but the studies that we need are vaccinated versus unvaccinated, following kids forward for decades. That's never been done, not even close. So we just have a few epidemiologic studies. Generally, they don't ask the question of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, but they ask some other question, and they're looking into some of these issues. But it's still not the best. You can't answer these questions without doing studies in the other way. So we just have a few data points here and there, but nothing robust and nothing overly helpful at this point, because any sort of epidemiologic study is very, very easy to bias that data depending on your preconceived notions. And so
what's an example of that?
So an example of that would be Secretary Kennedy was talking about maybe a couple months ago now that the hepatitis B and on autism risk and the studies that were hidden back in the day because they showed 1,000% increase in autism. And that kind of goes back to the initial research when they started looking at the data showed a huge increase in potential concerns around the ingredient thimerosal mercury and an increase in autism. And then after they adjusted, it didn't find anything. So you can adjust the data any way that you want with epidemiology to vastly change what you find. And doing adjustments is appropriate. It's just a question of how you adjust it, because that can change the numbers very, very drastically. So for example, let's just say you're doing a study looking at autism rates and you look at the data and you're like, oh, wow, kids that have more vaccines have 5 times risk of getting autism. Well, you can go back and you can say, well, we must have missed something. Let's add another confounder. Let's add another factor that we weren't thinking of. Oh, we add this other thing in. Okay, now it's 0. All right, I guess that's right. Let's publish the paper. So you get to choose what you're adjusting for. And based on the assumptions that you're making, it changes the output a lot. And so it doesn't mean that it's right or wrong to adjust it. It just how you adjust it will affect the numbers greatly. And if you have a bias of vaccines cause a problem, you're much more likely to adjust things in a way that shows they have a problem versus if you're the head of the CDC safety, you're like, well, I'm showing a problem. Let me readjust this until I don't. And that's why those prospective studies are so important, because it's really much harder to fudge that kind of information. And I'm not saying that people were doing this. I'm just saying that is what epidemiology is. And when you have such a contentious topic, it's really, you really don't see the robust research that you need to really know what to do when it comes to these long-term risks.
Yeah, that's great. And an example that I like when it comes to how epidemiology and epidemiological research can be kind of skewed to make whatever point you want to make. I was really interested in red meat for a long time, still am. You know, I felt better when I ate red meat. I was vegetarian for a long time. I started eating meat again, but I was like, should I be concerned about cholesterol, about like heart disease, any of these things? You know, like red meat's been so vilified for so long. And I found a really interesting study. You know, we've all heard that like there's higher risk of heart disease if you eat more red meat. But it turns out that there's a lot of confounding factors. Like people who are vegetarian and vegan are the types of people, generally speaking, who care about their health, who are less likely to smoke, who are more likely to exercise, all these different things that also play a factor. And there was a study that took this epidemiological research and controlled for where people bought their food. And they found that if you controlled for people shopping at health food stores, so if you looked at only people that shopped at Whole Foods, all of a sudden there was no correlation with eating red meat and higher risk of heart disease. And it's like, oh, that's really interesting. So if you're a health-oriented, health-minded person, then eating meat or not eating meat doesn't really change your risk. And that's really interesting it's an interesting takeaway that kind of shatters that like narrative, right? So
right, assuming that they controlled correctly, right?
Right.
You know, and that's the thing, right? Should you be controlling for the fact that someone went to Whole Foods or not? Maybe that masks what actually should be there, right? And that's why epidemiology is so, it's good. I mean, it's good, it's good information, but it's not the end all and be all, because ultimately it depends on how you control things. And if you don't do things ethically, if you change things after the fact, you can change the results to find anything that you want, because you can keep adding in different confounders, different factors until you find the results that you want, and you can wash away findings that are actually should be there. And there was the recent study that was the big one that came out. That was the Danish study talking about chronic disease and autism and vaccines. And one of the big things that they did, which is a big concern in the epidemiology research, is they controlled for the amount of visits that patients had. And almost every study seems to do that when you're talking about vaccines. They're controlling for how many visits the person had. And why that matters is their theory is if you don't come in as much, you don't have the same chance to get diagnosed with something, and therefore we have to control for that. So, for example, you know, if you're looking at I don't know, the amount of ear infections, then for kids that never come in, you can't get diagnosed with ear infections. So we have to control for that. But the problem with that in those kind of studies is maybe the kids are not coming because they're actually healthier. So if you control for the amount of visits, then you wash away the actual finding where it should be, where the reason the kids are actually not coming in is because the vaccines cause a problem. And so the kids that never get a vaccine, they never come in because they don't have problems. So is that right? Is that wrong? Both things could be right. But that's where those kind of factors of what you choose can be really important. And a lot of the vaccine research, they always control for the amount of visits, and that washes away the findings which were there originally. And I have a problem with that, because I do think that if a kid had autism or asthma or something like that, they would go to the doctor, it would get seen, and it would get recorded. Something like ear infections, yeah, that makes sense. Like maybe a kid who's supernaturally minded, the parents don't bring them in ever, so they're never going to have an ear infection. So maybe you'll get more ear infections in the kids that actually show up. But I don't know that that's true with autism or asthma. Like if you're having an asthma attack, you're probably going to see a doctor. So I don't think the amount of visits actually matters that much. But I don't know. But that's again just goes back to, this is where the research is problematic and why you need a prospective study, because that's what will actually see, okay, are what we find incorrect or incorrect? That's why you do that kind of research.
Did you know that millions of people across the country unknowingly drink water containing chemicals that have long-term negative effects on your body? Your tap water might not be as safe as you think. Depending on where you live, you might be getting exposed to lead, arsenic, PFAs, or forever chemicals, microplastics, pesticides, and over 270 other dangerous contaminants. And unfortunately, built-in fridge filters and cheap off-the-shelf water filters often don't get all the nasty stuff out of your water. If you want to ensure that you are drinking clean, uncontaminated water, check out AquaTru for cutting-edge reverse osmosis water purifiers. This is a great company. I've vetted them myself. They have 2 different countertop water filters if you want something simple. They also have an under-the-sink option, which takes a little bit more time and effort to install, but then you can enjoy the convenience of clean drinking water right out of the tap. AquaTru filters use a patented 4-stage filtration system, which is 80% more effective than traditional reverse osmosis systems, and they get rid of all the bad stuff. I'm talking pesticides, microplastics, forever chemicals, lead, arsenic, fluoride, if you're concerned about that, you name it. And 96% of their customers say it's the best water they've ever tasted. Use my special link in the episode description to get $100 off any of AquaTru's systems. And if it's not the best water you've ever tasted, get a full refund within 30 days. Again, use my special link in the episode description to save $100 on your new water filter. Gentlemen, I've got a question for you. Do you know what chemicals you're putting on your balls? I'm talking about underwear, and unfortunately, I hate to say it, conventional big brand underwear often contain harmful chemicals and toxins that can be absorbed through skin contact. God damn it, right? Now we've got to think about underwear. Well, do not fear, because NADS, organic underwear, is the clean, healthy home your balls deserve. I recently needed to replace a bunch of my old ratty underwear, and I actually saw an ad for NADS on Instagram. So I figured, what the heck? I'll try them out. 100% organic cotton sounds great. I love them. Maybe you don't care about chemicals or fabrics or any of that stuff. I'm telling you, they're my favorite underwear I've ever owned. I'm a boxer brief guy, all black, because black is classy, makes me look more tan than I am, which I love. NADS are perfect. They provide enough support without being restrictive. They're the softest and most comfortable underwear I've ever owned. I use them to work out as well as for everyday wear. I have 0 notes. They're awesome. They also have a classic boxer and a shorter cut trunk, if that's your thing. And they have a no-fly version of their boxer briefs. So pick your preferred flavor. Use my special link in the description below, or go to nadsunder.com and use code Steven to get 15% off your order. That's Steven with a V. Again, use my link in the episode description below, or go to nadsunder and use code Steven with a V to get 15% off your order. Give your boys the home they deserve with NADS. I would love to double click on autism, because that is such a contentious topic within the vaccine topic. Obviously, it's been supercharged by RFK Jr. and it's just like, I don't know, just like a radioactive topic. Is there clear evidence either way that vaccines cause autism or don't cause autism that you've seen?
I would say in my work for the book, the by far most shocking thing is the research on autism. When I was in training and really over the last decade, the things that you hear over and over again are the science is settled, it's been debunked, we know for sure that has nothing to do with it. And you're like, okay, I guess then you're pretty confident. We have a lot of research. And when you actually look at the research, it's ridiculous to make those claims. I mean, there are almost no studies. There really aren't any studies that look at all vaccines and autism. That's just never been studied. The research that we do have thus far is on MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, and thimerosal, the mercury component of vaccines, which isn't even in vaccines anymore and hasn't been in 20 years. So we don't know. We've never studied it. We keep saying that we do know, but we actually don't. We've never done an unvaccinated versus vaccinated study. We've never looked at all the vaccines. I mean, you can't say based on the MMR study that vaccines don't cause autism. There are a whole bunch of vaccines you give in the first year that have never been studied in this way. So we actually just don't know. And anybody that looked at the research would come to the same conclusion, and has come to the same conclusion. And the only people that say that vaccines are definitively debunked that don't cause autism never looked at it and just are listening to headlines, and just repeating it over and over again. It's being said in that way because the basic theory that's being used is we haven't proven that vaccines cause autism, therefore they don't cause autism. But you have to look first. You have to actually do research to show it one way or another. You can't say that vaccines don't cause autism. You should be saying we don't know, not, well, we don't have any studies that show that vaccines cause autism, therefore they don't. That doesn't make any sense. But that is what's happening. It's been repeated over and over again, and people just repeat it. And if you go look at the research, it doesn't exist.
Okay. So the science is not settled. That's the takeaway there.
Not even close. And nobody that looked at the research would ever think that. You don't know because it's repeated over and over again. So people just repeat it over and over again. And they think that there's just so much science. And there's nothing that's ever been more weird or clear in my life when you go look at this and you're like, nobody in their right mind would look at that and said that's settled. We haven't even studied most of the vaccines at all in relationship to autism. And again, keep in mind, most vaccine research, it's studied before the vaccine hits the market. And it's studied for just a couple of days, maybe a few months, maybe a year or two. If you're very lucky, generally it's not that long. So how are you going to study autism in any of those studies? It takes a long time for these things to develop. Nobody's looking at that, and no one ever has.
What would it take to change? What would it take? Like, are we going to have to take away immunity from liability from these companies? Or is it just going to be like a cultural shift of people demanding it? What is it going to take to actually do some of this science?
I think it's the demands. I mean, I think we're seeing it now. I think it's COVID, right? COVID did it. I think that people were not really thinking about vaccines for a very long time. And then all of a sudden we're faced with this new situation. You know, most of us got shots when we were kids, then never thought about it again. Maybe if you had kids, then you start thinking, oh, wait, how many vaccines are there? What do I have to do? And that maybe made you think about it a little bit. But COVID made us think about it. And we watched being lied to. We watched messaging change. You saw people that got a vaccine that had a reaction. You saw people that it didn't help protect. I mean, all sorts of things that people saw. And that just opened up their mind again to the whole vaccine conversation. And then you saw health, take a 180 shift. And now you have someone who was like the most anti-vaxxer crazy person in most people's minds 5 years ago, now in charge of health. It's Secretary Kennedy. And he's, talking about all the things that he's known for years, or he's thought. And so now this stuff is starting to come out. And we'll see. I think we're going to see a lot more information. You're getting a lot more discussion about vaccines. And what it's going to take is open debate, open discussion, and research. I don't think in the short term we're going to see liability go away. I think that's difficult. That's something that probably does need to happen. Maybe there needs to be some limited liability, some sort of transition. I don't know. You can't ultimately just be like, well, vaccines cause problems and now we're giving you liability and everyone can go sue. That doesn't make sense either. And currently, as you said, if you do sue right now, you're suing the government. So imagine if we started to think that vaccines do cause autism, and then everyone with autism started suing the government for millions of dollars. Like, we don't have that much money in America. So, there are like logistical problems here that they have to figure out. But ultimately, we need discussion, we need research, and then we'll need to actually show that vaccines could cause a problem if they do. And if they do, then you're going to have pushback from people getting it, and the companies will be required to make changes. So I think ultimately it could be the confidence that we have and the people actually getting it. And if people stop getting it, then that's going to force reformulation.
Where did we net out with the COVID vaccine, do you think? Like, that's something that I've thought about a lot, that I find it really hard to definitively know or form any kind of like concrete grounded opinion about, because there's just so much bullshit flying around constantly. Like, it seems like there's a few things that are uncontrovertibly true. Like, it seems like reporting on COVID death rates were inflated. It seems like hospitals were incentivized to attribute cause of death to COVID, and there were countless examples of elderly people who had other diseases like stage 4 cancer or type 2 diabetes or these other things that they were already dying from, getting COVID and dying, and then the hospital attributes that death to COVID and nothing else. Like, that's a problem. So the death rate, like it seemed really scary at first. It was like, the news was saying 3 to 4% of people are dying from this thing. And then now that it's all netted out, it seems like it's much smaller than that, maybe only 0.3, 0.1%, something like that. And then it also seems like vaccine injuries from COVID were underreported. I think Pfizer and Moderna have both been sued for downplaying myocarditis and pericarditis, particularly in young, healthy men. I'm sure you know a lot more about that than I do. Seems like mandates didn't make sense for young, healthy people. But it's also hard to know. Like maybe the COVID vaccine saved millions of lives. Maybe it just gave a lot of people heart conditions that didn't need to take it. It's really hard to know for sure what happened, like what really went down and what's continuing to bubble up to the surface. What's your take? What is your view on COVID?
Yeah, you're 100% spot on. The world with COVID is so confusing because there seems to be still two very definitive sides. And it's like the COVID vaccine saved millions of lives, the best thing ever, saved trillions of dollars. And then the other side says the worst thing ever and it's killing people and it should never be on the market. It should never have been on the market. It should be pulled. And you're like, okay, like which one is right? can't both be right. So, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, like most things. The only way we're actually going to know for sure is if people actually sit down and talk to each other and debate and discuss. You never see that. You just see these two different worlds. And ultimately, I think you see these worlds because you have people that don't want to talk to each other. And one world is like, well, look how many people this saved, this many people it improved. And the other world's like, well, yeah, maybe it did help people minimize the risk for COVID, but look how many problems it caused. And we don't know. Like we just don't know that. I mean, I think we have a good understanding that probably it's reasonable to say that in the initial waves of COVID, the vaccine did decrease the severity for the people that got it. I think you can look at the data and that's pretty clear. But it's also clear that if you look longitudinally, if you look over time, the vaccine doesn't work as well. And you go years in, and in many countries, the individuals that were vaccinated started having a higher risk of actually getting coronavirus. So where that plays out now is hard to say. Should you be getting 15 COVID vaccines? Probably not. Everything has a risk, right? And I think we've downplayed the risks severely. I think it's not just myocarditis. There are many other people that have many other issues, and it's hard to know exactly where those numbers are. But I think that it caused a lot of problems for a lot of people, and we should take that into account and really think through where we go forward. And the simple answer is just look at what people are doing, right? I mean, most people are not getting COVID vaccines anymore. I mean, even though they were available last year, you're looking at 5% or so of parents got them for their kids. Maybe 25% of adults got it. So most people decided, I don't think I need these things anymore. I disagree. That to me speaks louder than anything that we have missed the boat and the messaging was completely off. When you have a recommendation for everybody and basically nobody's doing it, that means that most people have come to the conclusion that probably it causes more problems than it helps. And many people maybe got it and don't feel like they should have got it, or they don't feel like they should keep getting it. So certainly, at least at this point, I think that the vast majority of people don't feel like they should get more boosters, and that the risks don't outweigh the benefits, especially if you're healthy. And that while it's very controversial these days, seemingly, it probably shouldn't be so controversial to switch the recommendations. I mean, that's what most countries do. Most countries offer them to high risk individuals. They don't give them to young, healthy people. And the vast majority of the young, healthy people don't get them anyways. So I don't think what Kennedy is doing is overly controversial. He's just doing what everybody already wants, or most people want, and what most countries are doing. So I think that's all reasonable. Now, where it's going to shake out, whether they're going to pull it totally at some point, I don't know. But they need that data, which I don't think they totally have yet. And we'll see, give them another year or two with some more information and data, and more things are probably going to come out. And that may be enough to pull it totally. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to find or how they're going to present it.
Have you seen any studies that seemed like they were well conducted and compelling when it comes to risks from the vaccine? Because I see these study headlines all the time, like 400% increase of all these different types of cancer from people that got the COVID vaccine. But it's just like, if you want to double click on all that stuff and see if it's credible, it's like a full-time job trying to chase all these things down and trying to figure out what's real.
Yeah, and you get one side that says that, and the next side that says no difference, and actually helped your health. So it's hard. You need weight of evidence. You need multiple different things, and ultimately you need the best kinds of studies, and those take time and a lot of money. So ultimately, COVID vaccine or any vaccine, for us to really see changes, unless Kennedy just does it himself, you're going to need to see a priority put back on research and an understanding that we don't know everything about it, and we're going to have an open mind, and we're going to start some studies. We're going to follow people for years. We're going to see what we find, and we'll make some decisions based on that. To me, that seems like the best path forward. That's somewhere in the middle, where we're going to acknowledge that there could be problems, but we're not going to make unilateral decisions. And we're going to go and we're going to say, look, this is a big enough issue that we need the best kind of studies. We need to spend the billions. We got to follow people forward. We did it before. We did it with heart disease. We can do it with other things. We can follow people for generations, and let's see what we find, and let's be open to whatever we find.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. What are your thoughts on mRNA vaccines in general? Do you feel like those were proven safe before launching the COVID vaccine through this warp speed thing, or do you have concerns about those vaccines in general? Because it seems like another case where we got one approved, we got one passed the safety tests, right? And then we just assume that all of them are fine and we're just running away with that new technology. That concerns me just from the stuff I've seen. Like, I know way more people that got injured from the COVID vaccine than I have ever known gotten any injuries from any other vaccine ever. And it just kind of freaks me out a little bit to think about those becoming ubiquitous. But I also recognize that, like, I don't know. I don't really know what's going on. Maybe I'm, more worried than I should be, or yeah.
No, I think that's totally reasonable, and I think that's where most people are right now. I think that if you go back to the beginning of the pandemic, when you're in the middle of an emergency and you don't know what's going on, you have to do things fast, and you have to do things without all the data. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way that it is, and I don't have any issue with the way specifically that we kind of try to do things in a faster way in an emergency situation to get something out that seemed like it was beneficial. The problem is when you make claims that are just not true, or when you make claims that are not based on what you actually know, or you force anybody to do anything. I don't have a problem with getting a vaccine out fast in an emergency situation. I have a problem with you forcing people to get it. You should say something like, well, you shouldn't say safe and effective. What you should say is, based on what we have seen so far, here is the benefits that we see. Seems like it decreases your risk of death. It seems like it decreases the risk of hospitalization. So far, we don't see any safety signals. We're going to keep studying it. We don't know anything about long-term. You could grow a third leg for all we know. But, it seems like these things are beneficial. So we recommend you get it. Go get it if you want to. Don't get it if you don't want to. Nothing wrong with that. That's not what happened. They tried to force people to do it. And that, to me, is the issue, because you have a new technology. You don't know how it's going to work. You don't know what the safety signals are. They didn't know about myocarditis, or maybe they did and they hit it, but let's just assume they didn't really know it. And you will find out things later, and that's what research is supposed to be for. And you're supposed to pick up signals as you go. And I think that they thought that it just kind of stays in one place, but it doesn't. That it should be really short term, but it's not always. So I think we're finding out things that maybe we didn't quite know, or weren't totally known. But that doesn't mean that mRNA as a platform is totally bad. I mean, that's what research is for. Like, if you're honest about it and you find problems, then you research, well, why are you having those problems, and you improve it. And maybe there will be some uses for it in the future. Maybe different versions will be better. Maybe there's a lot of research around cancer. And maybe, there's a risk of myocarditis with mRNA, but maybe if you have stage 4 cancer and that can cure your cancer, you're willing to take the 1 in 1,000 risk of myocarditis to save your life. So everything has its pluses and minuses if you're honest about it. And there certainly could be uses for it in the future. But I think that the current iteration has a lot of concerns. And I think those concerns are going to continue to mount unless we see some honesty and some real research.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I love that. I feel very aligned with that. And I think the thing that really tipped me over an edge, or red pilled me, or whatever you want to call it, was watching the communication during COVID and seeing people come forward with real, seemingly credible testimonials, experiences, whatever, whether it was doctors seeing, increased rates of myocarditis in their patients or whatever. And then that getting met with shaming and policing and silencing. It's just like, yo, that's sketchy. Like, I don't we just need to know. We need to be like paying attention to what's actually happening to people so that we can be honest and give the best recommendations to people and have informed consent. And there's like a psyop happening here, seemingly. Like we're like really actively trying to shut down people that that are, you know, getting injured from these things or talking about injuries in their patients and things like that.
Yeah, can I add that? Because again, that goes a little bit full circle to what we were talking about with, I mean, that was some of the reasons why I decided to write a book, right? It's like, I just couldn't take it anymore. Like, it's so crazy to me that we can't have discussion and debates and on a topic like this. Like, we have to be able to talk about it. I wrote the book not to tell people what to do, but to open up discussion, to be able to talk about things like this. Because when you start seeing what was going on during the pandemic, it has to be a big red flag that there's something more going on. Like, there's no reason you should need to censor people for what they're saying about a vaccine. That doesn't make any sense. Like, you should be able to have open debate and someone should be like, no, that's a crazy crackpot. What's he talking about? Here's the real research. But that's what you need. And when you start to shut that down, when you start to say, oh, natural immunity doesn't count, when it counts for every other disease, when you start to say, no, you can't prescribe ivermectin because that's some horrible medication that could never, you know, help you. And it's like,
it's horse dewormer or whatever.
It's like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, this is a very common medication that we use all the time, that's super safe in general. And you can make the claim that it doesn't work. Okay, you can say, look, we did all these studies and it doesn't work, but it doesn't matter. Like, a doctor can prescribe whatever they want anytime. If you harm your patient, they can sue you if you do something that's off label or, you know, something crazy. But that's up to you guys to decide and discuss if you want to do it. If you feel like it's going to help them, you're able to do it. And all of a sudden you have these rules where you can't do things like that. It's just so absurd. And it's so obvious that there's a concerted effort to stop people from having discussion. And I think they flew way too close to the sun. They showed their cards. I think everybody realized that the vaccine world it is really based on this deck of cards that's very flimsy at the bottom. And they don't want people to see things or ask questions. And you know, it's not to be too conspiratorial, but it's just super obvious when you look at COVID that it's like, there was a lot of things that people just didn't want anybody to see. And they don't want you to ask questions and discuss it. And once you start to do that, then you're like, wait, okay, that's what they were talking about with that. Well, what about all the rest of the vaccine? And then you go look and you're like, wait, what? Like, that's what we're saying? That's what it's based on? And that's where we are now. That's why nobody trusts health anymore. Nobody trusts healthcare. Nobody trusts doctors. Nobody trusts the media. Like, they were just lied to so much. And we have a long way to go to build that back. And it's very clear to me after doing the research that there's a lot more information that we need. And again, it's not that vaccines are bad or that they all cause problems or they don't cause any good. I think that they do cause some good, and they have a lot of good to them. But I don't think we understand the risks, and we can't keep saying that they're just not causing problems, because I think they are.
Yeah, that's well said. And that brings up another topic and issue that we haven't talked about yet, which is advertising and the media and lobbying and all these things. I mean, I think that's something a lot of people don't think about is, you know, these companies are not nonprofits just, you know, like trading their goodwill to try to help people. These are for-profit companies, some of the biggest companies, most powerful companies in the world, huge profit margins, or huge profits rather. And they spend some of those profits on lobbying, you know, paying or donating money to politicians to try to get what they want. I think you share in your book, I'd love to hear you talk about this, but like it's like 30 or 40% of the mainstream media budget comes from pharmaceutical advertising or something.
Oh, it's like 75%. Yeah, 75%. It's more than that. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, but it's not nefarious. It's just obvious, right? It's not evil. It's like, if you're a company, what do you want to do? If you have all the money in the world, you want to promote your products, you want to sell more of your products, you want to make money. And if you don't stop them from doing it, well, that's what they're going to do. And they like you said, they're not helping orphans in some other country. Like, they're paying influencers, they're paying the journals, they're paying the medical schools, they're paying the organizations that are supposed to be monitoring them, they're funding the news. You're not that likely to criticize a company if that's most of your budget that's paying for all your news. Like, that's just how it is. It's not nefarious. It's just they know. Like, they just know that if they, you know, if you're going to promote a candidate as a politician, that's not evil. It's just like, well, if you gave them $10 million, they're more likely to be nice to you. You know, they know that. They're less likely to cause a problem if you're funding them. Like, that's just obvious. And if you let them do it, it's not illegal. It's just that's what they're doing. So they know, and they're huge companies, and they just fund everything. And doctors are trained in a pharmaceutical model, and our schools are funded, and the journals are funded, and pharma pays for most of those studies. And so you don't even realize that you're being marketed to, because that's just the environment that we live in. We just live in a pharma environment, and they paid for everything, not evilly, just they did. They paid for everything because they want you to use their products and buy their products and work with their products. And so that's what you would do if you were in charge too. We have to change that. We have to disentangle it a little bit. And not all pharma is bad, and many medications are amazing and life-saving. So it's not all bad, but we have to have some checks and balances. And I think that's the biggest issue right now that we're starting to see, is there are very few checks and balances on these big companies, especially when it comes to vaccines. And even the checks and balances that we have, which are minimal for pharma, we don't have most of those for vaccines. So we have an environment that's created this product that doesn't follow the rules that every other product in America follows. And so we're surprised when we have more and more potential concerns and nobody doing anything about it. That's just a systems problem that we have created, we must fix.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a little bit more about conflicts of interest and kind of the self-regulation that's happening with pharma in general?
Yeah, I mean, you look at any study about most of these products, that it's funded by the company, funded by people who do research for the company. And then they pay for the journal, they pay to get it in, they pay it, everything. So it's a conflict of interest when you're funding everything that's done for your products. I mean, it just is. It's not wrong. It's just that's the way that it is. I mean, if you pay for the research, then you're more likely to have research that finds what you want it to find.
Right.
Ultimately, that's going to be a way that, things need money. So that's why things get moving in a direction they get moving. But we have to understand that, and we need some checks and balances. And we have very little of that right now, especially when it comes to vaccines, because the biggest check and balance that we have for most products is that you can get sued. And you can't even do that for vaccines. So there's nothing stopping them from fudging the data, pushing the data, finding companies that'll do their research, that'll get them the results that they want, set up a study where you aren't going to find a problem. Like the pneumococcus vaccine, the very first pneumococcus vaccine hit the market. They didn't study it against nothing. They studied it against meningococcus. Like, there was no reason to do that. You could study it against saltwater; it would be free, and you have the actual best results. But they studied it against another vaccine that wasn't even on the market, that was experimental at the time.
Wow.
Where is the FDA and the CDC being like, no. We're not accepting that until you do the best kind of study. No one forced them to do it. So why would they? You were a company and you spending $1 billion to get a product which you're set to make hundreds of billions of dollars in the next few years. Are you going to be like, well, let me make a study in the best possible way so I could maybe find a problem? No, you're going to be like, how do I set up my study to find the least problems possible so it's most likely my product gets approved? Nothing nefarious about that. That's just what you would do. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening.
Right. I want to share a personal story because I don't watch TV very often. I watch Netflix and Prime like everybody else. And so I don't see many advertisements on TV because I'm not watching cable. And last fall I was back home in Washington, and I don't know why. Maybe this wasn't a new thing, but it's just I just noticed it for the first time. But I was grocery shopping at Safeway. And I remember going to Safeway like 3 or 4 times within a week period because I was moving around a lot and just hadn't done like a big grocery haul. So I'd just pick up a thing or two. And 3 out of the 4 times that I went into the grocery store randomly in the evening, they were playing advertisements for vaccines over the loudspeaker, right? It was like, go to the back, get your flu vaccine, get your COVID vaccine, and get 10% off your groceries. And I was just like, yo, when did this become normal? Like, we're getting advertised to with this stuff all the time. And then this summer, I've been on a baseball kick. I've been watching the Mariners because they're actually doing well for once. And you see some advertisements on MLB TV. So I've been seeing ads for the first time. And it's crazy how many COVID vaccine commercials and flu vaccine commercials and like commercials for vaccines for old people for things I've never even heard of. And then there's advertisements for GLP-1 shots. And, they don't mention that Novo Nordisk, like the Danish pharma company that makes Ozempic, just got sued for $2 billion because like thousands of people went blind from getting Ozempic shots for weight loss of all things. It's just like, man, this has got to change. We've got to.
And it's not like this in most other countries. I mean, that's a reality that you just don't realize if you live here. But I mean, I grew up in Canada, so is one of the first things that you notice when you come to America. Certainly when I was younger, it's like there are no pharma ads at all, and then you come here and like every ad or every other ad is pharma, and that's unique. But either way, I mean, I think we do have to change the pharma ads, and I think that's part of what's happening. But they still find every single way possible to advertise, just like you said. Like nothing stops them from advertising at the store or whatever. And we need to move away from that. We need to move away from pharma as the first solution. And being a last resort and kind of pushing people to do things. It's got to be more educational and informing people and letting doctors have discussions with their patients, and then moving away from more is better, more vaccines are better, more medications is better. That's not true. Some vaccines can protect you, but 1 million is not necessarily the answer, nor is getting on 50,000 pills.
Right.
That doesn't get to anything that's a root cause. And we have to move back towards that, because if you zoom out, we're not healthy. I mean, we're not healthy as a country. The latest data shows 75% of Americans have a chronic disease, about 50% of kids. I mean, the numbers are staggering and terrible. And yeah, we have more vaccines, but we're not healthier overall. And that is not a good thing. So we have to assess that. And that's what Kennedy is doing. Some people agree with him, some people don't. But I think ultimately you have to look at our general health and say, well, whatever we're doing isn't working. So it's good that we're having a shakeup. You can agree or disagree with his decisions. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't agree with everything on any politician, which is fine, but we do need change. And I'm glad that we are at least discussing it. And I'm glad with the MAHA movement that there's discussion about health stuff. And again, I guess not everybody agrees with all of the decisions or where things are moving, but we need change. So some change is good, and it's going to take a while to shake things up, but ultimately we need some different things.
Yeah, what is your take? What do you think of RFK Jr. and MAHA in general? I spoke out publicly in support of RFK last summer when he was still running as an independent, and then he dropped out and endorsed Trump, and I still support him now. So I had the cancel mob come after me over that one. But yeah, I just loved that a politician who was in a position to have real influence and make change was actually talking about chronic disease, about things like obesity, diabetes, cancer, and talking about root cause. Like, we need to get people healthy. We need to think about our food and where our food comes from, and regenerative agriculture. We need to overhaul the farm bill, like all these things. I got really excited about that and still am. But again, it's this situation now where there's so much flying around constantly. It would be a full-time job to vet it all and to try to understand like what's being done that's good, what's being done that's harmful. Budgets have been cut for people doing seemingly important research, but it's really hard to tell if it was important research or just like fluff from a pharma company that's trying to push their products or whatever. And but yeah, what is your take? Like, have we made progress? Are we making progress? Are you optimistic? Are you concerned?
Yeah, we're on the same page. I mean, it is impossible. There's like 10 different headlines every day, and you don't know always what's good or what's bad. But I am super excited about the movement. I think it's great that we're talking about health. I think that there is the potential for a huge net positive. I'm very supportive of a lot of things that are going on right now. Not everything for sure. It's hard to know sometimes, with a budget cut or this or that, like you said, like whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. And I think most people forget. They're like, well, you talk about, Secretary Kennedy says he wants to cut or get rid of this and that, and then you decrease the funding for this thing. But they forget that like the government's big. It's not all him. There are many people doing things. There are many people doing things in all sorts of directions, and he can't do everything, and he's not even necessarily involved in everything, nor are people that are, air quotes, MAHA. So there are bills that will get passed through that have nothing to do with those people, or maybe they're fighting, but they don't always have all the say in it. So yeah, there's so many different levers and so many different things, and he's in charge of the HHS, the CDC, and NIH, and those have tens of thousands of people in each one, and not all of them agree, and everyone's moving in a different direction. So they've done a lot for just a couple of months. Not everything's you're going to agree with, and no matter what, you're not going to agree with everything that they're doing, but they are discussing health. You have health on the news like it's never been before. You have ingredients that we're talking about. Like, is taking a red dye out of food or whatever going to make a difference? No, not really. But is it matter that we're talking about it? Yes, it does. And are you going to be able to change the entire food system in a couple months? No, you're not. But you can remove some sugar, and you can have conversations around the rules, and you can remove some of the toxic ingredients, or at least put them on notice so people start reading labels more. And they absolutely are. So all those things are good. We're talking about closing the GRAS loophole, generally recognized as safe. So, so companies can't put new products on. He's working on putting new people in different positions, and you can argue whether he should do that or not do that. But ultimately, the way that we were going was bad. So you need new people to go in a different direction. And some of those people are probably great people, but ultimately they led organizations that are having our health fall off a cliff. So you do need new people with new ideas. And you're not going to agree with all those new ideas, but we have to have a new direction. And I'm glad to see that we are, and they are doing a lot, and there is a lot of good. And there are many criticisms of MAHA that are good criticisms, and there are big things that need to be fixed too. But those things are bigger in general, and they do need to. And yeah, there are some things that are cut that probably shouldn't be cut, but they probably didn't have that much to do with that. And even if they did, I mean, they got to cut budget somewhere, and we're going to disagree on things. Yeah, we need more funding for SNAP. It's the nutrition program, and we need more research for nutrition, and we need more money for food. And these are things that we do need, and maybe hopefully ultimately there'll be pushback on some of those things. I agree. We need more funding for the EPA. We need more. We need, if you want to have these rules and regulations, you need them, but it's hard to do all that in just a couple months.
Yeah.
So I think overall they've done a great job, and there are plenty of things that they could do better. And hopefully that's what the pushback is for. And people will keep pushing for a much healthier future. But I think we're in the right direction right now that we weren't before.
I love that. Yeah, I'm super aligned with you on all that. I think that was a great answer, and great to hear your thoughts. I find it fascinating that people will push back on chronic disease and this idea that our health was, running towards a cliff and about to fall off a cliff. They'll say like, I mean, these are people that have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, so it doesn't really matter. They're kind of irrelevant, but it's just fascinating. I'm like, really? You guys, the data is public data. Like the numbers.
Or just use your eyes.
Just use your eyes. Like every time I go to the airport and I look around, I'm like, wow, America's not doing great. Like people are weird shapes. You know what I mean? Like these are these are unhealthy people. Yeah.
Yeah. You look around a school. I mean, anybody that's commenting from the outside that they just yap their mouth off, and it's like, have you talked to a teacher? Have you gone to a school? Have you gone to a playground? Have you gone to Disneyland? Have you walked through an airport? Like you said, like people are obese. People are very overweight. People are unhealthy. They have many chronic conditions. They have many medications. That's not the way that it was. And then, people are, oh, well, 200 years ago, we died when we were 40. Okay, yes, we are healthier than we were 200 years ago. We have nutrition. People actually have food. We don't have horses pooping in the street. Like we've done some things that are better. But life expectancy was going up forever, and then it started going back down.
Yeah.
And we didn't have all these chronic diseases 50 years ago, and now we do. It was like 5% or 10%, and now it's like 50 to 75%. That's not okay. Like we want people to live to 120. Like we don't want to be unhealthy. So yes, we're living longer than we did in 1800, but we're also not being as healthy as we could be. And that's because our food is so crappy and we have so many toxins, and we weren't talking about it. And we can improve that. We can not die when we're 40, but also be a little healthier and not have chronic disease if we actually tackle some of these things. But these are big things. Like I don't care. It's not vaccines. Like it's not just vaccines. You can't throw everything on that. There's so many things going on in our world that are toxic. And, you can take away vaccines totally and people are still going to be unhealthy. You can take away red dye number 40 and people are still going to eat ultra processed foods. Like it's a big, big thing. But we're not going to make it better by not talking about it. Like we have to move in that direction, and we need more local food and more movement and fewer chemicals. Like all these things together are going to get us where we need to be, but you're not going to do that in 1 year.
Yeah, totally. I have a few more questions about vaccines, but on that note, what's the next book? Are you going to stay focused on vaccines for the foreseeable future, or are there other health topics that you're passionate about?
I'm taking a break right now. It was enough with the vaccines, and the vaccines is so crazy right now that I'm going to do so much stuff with it. I might do more vaccine stuff. I might do something with autism. I don't know what's going to be next. We'll see. I just decided I'm doing nothing for a little bit. Because this is enough.
Yeah, I bet. Good for you.
Podcasts are a lot. I mean, podcasts are great, and I love it, and I like doing it much more than like the news or other things. The news is stupid. Like you talk for 1 minute, and they're like, "All right, well, this bombing's happening over here, and here's Dr. Joel talking about parenting thing." You're like, okay. You can only talk about stuff for so long, but doing a podcast is great, and you learn a lot. But then it takes an hour or two each time, so it's a lot of work. But I think it's important to kind of spread the message right now, and we'll see where things go. I mean, hopefully for me, I want to be more in advocacy. So that's what I've been trying to do and trying to be more involved. So we'll see where that takes me.
Okay, great. Love that. Okay, a few quicker questions in wrapping up here. Some of this is going to be your opportunity to summarize things we've already talked about. Some of these are new questions. Are there any vaccines that in your mind, the benefits far outweigh the risks? And I'd also love to hear vice versa.
Yeah, that is the right question without an answer, right? Because you cannot answer that question without understanding what the risks are. So the answer to that question depends on whether vaccines cause long-term complications, right? I think you can look at which vaccines. And we don't know. I mean, do vaccines cause autism? Do they cause chronic disease? If the answer is no, then the benefits outweigh the risks by a long way on some of them. If they do cause a lot of long-term complications, then they don't necessarily, right? And then you're talking about, well, what's the benefits? I mean, measles certainly probably the most beneficial with how deadly that disease can be, how contagious it is, and how well it works. Things like polio, diphtheria, you haven't seen that in a long time. So those don't have a lot of benefit in the short term. Maybe if they start coming back, they could. So that's the way I think you weigh it. But the answer to that question, you can't make until you have the proper long-term research, in my mind. But if you're going based on what we do know right now, yeah, I would say probably measles, whooping cough, Haemophilus, and pneumococcus have the most benefit in the short term.
Okay. And then any on the flip side, like it seems like Hep B for babies, maybe.
I would say,
beneficial.
Polio, there's not really a benefit unless you're traveling somewhere with polio, unless polio comes back. Hepatitis B for a newborn, very minimal benefit. I mean, we definitely have dropped the risk of Hep B, and you don't want Hep B, but assuming that you have been tested appropriately, it's a pretty small risk. Diphtheria, we haven't seen that in a long time. The COVID vaccine, I think most people would think that that's probably the least beneficial one at this point. So those would be the ones.
Okay. And then, people, whenever vaccines come up, they always, the people that are pro-vaccines, an argument that gets brought up all the time is like, well, if hesitancy keeps going up and we don't have, herd immunity with all these vaccines and stuff, then polio is going to come back and measles are going to come back and all these other deadly diseases. Are you concerned about that? And how concerned should we be about something like that happening?
Well, public health is a reasonable consideration when it comes to vaccines. There is a herd immunity aspect to some of the vaccines. Some vaccines do prevent transmission, so it does make a difference to other people if you are vaccinating because you decrease that risk. A lot of vaccines don't. So a lot of vaccines and a lot of diseases have nothing to do with that, and you getting a vaccine has nothing to do with protecting somebody else. It only protects you because you can still spread it even if you don't get sick. So, for example, the polio vaccine that we have now, it doesn't protect anybody else. It doesn't give herd immunity at all. That's no part of that. So you're protecting you if you are exposed to polio, which again, you don't want polio, right?
But it should be an individual choice.
I'm happy that we have it, but does a 2-month-old need it if there hasn't been polio in 40 years in America? Probably not, right? I mean, if polio starts to come back, would that change? Sure. If a lot of people start getting polio, should you give it to little kids? Probably you should, right? It's the same thing as Hep B. Like, does every baby need a Hep B? I don't think they do. But if your mom has Hep B, then should you get it? Probably you should, right? I think you have to weigh those things, and you have to look at the population too, and how a vaccine might affect other people. But ultimately, you have to do what makes sense for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. This is kind of a summarizing question. What would you like to see happen with vaccines moving forward? If you were in charge or could wave a magic wand, get anything you want, what would you like to see happen?
Yeah, the two big things would be discussion and debate. I think we need to see important people who have high positions debating each other on stage very publicly, having discussions on this, so that especially with something like COVID, I think it would be very helpful if you saw like our Secretary Kennedy speaking with Paul Offit and them debating why you should or shouldn't get it, and then they can present their facts, people can back it up. That would be super helpful. That's number one. And number two, we need research. We need studies. We need prospective trials. Somebody's got to start some vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. So that way, in 10 years from now, we have much better research than we have today. And we should have some humility to think that we don't know everything and we don't have all the best information and we can't make them better. If we do the proper research, we can make things better and we can have more information in 10 years and we can have more confident people doing vaccines because they would be safer. So I think that's the two things we need to do.
That's great. And then what's the main thing you hope people take away from this conversation?
I think the main thing I would love people to take away is that it's not woo-woo or out there to ask questions. I think that if you have some skepticism or some questions around vaccines, that's completely reasonable. And the reality is actually most people do at this point. And I think we need to ask those questions. We have to have those discussions. It cannot be censored. It cannot be in the back room. We cannot be worried about talking about it. You can't be worried about asking your doctor. We have to do that. And the only way that we're going to see change is if everybody starts talking about it and doctors are forced to start talking about it and forced to start researching it and forced to start looking at it to themselves because they have no choice. That's what's happening. I mean, we're seeing a change because it's front and center with Secretary Kennedy. a lot of parents are asking questions, and doctors have to look into it because otherwise they have no patience. So that will change things if people actually talk about it.
That's great. Yeah, it's validating too. That's a great message. Great takeaway. Where can people find you and follow along?
Oh, thank you for having me on. Thank you for talking about this.
Yeah.
You can find me, main places, Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator, or the book Between a Shot and a Hard Place. You can get it, all the places that books are sold, Amazon or theshotbook.com.
Awesome. I will be sure to link to it for everyone listening right there in the episode description. I appreciate you. This was really fascinating. I appreciate all your time. And keep being brave and giving people permission to have this conversation publicly or in private. This is a really charged one. And I think it's super important that people keep talking about it. And I'm sure it wasn't easy to decide to pursue this. You are a doctor. I'm sure you were making a decent living. And I'm sure it felt like that there was potential risk in choosing to put out this book and kind of put yourself out there. So I appreciate everything you're doing and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for listening, everybody. Much love to all of you. Hope this was interesting and helpful, and we will see you next time. All right. Thanks again to Dr. Joel Gator Warsh. What did you think of that? Did our conversation provoke you in any way? Did it change your mind about vaccines? Did it bring up questions of your own? If so, send this episode to someone who you think would find it interesting and use it to spark up a conversation. I've already sent it to several friends and family members because this is such a charged and difficult topic, and I'm excited to continue those conversations. If you want to dive deeper into the topic of vaccines, Joel's new book is Between a Shot and a Hard Place, Tackling Difficult Vaccine Questions with Balance, Data, and Clarity. You can find it on Amazon or wherever books are sold. It's on Audible as well, if you like to listen to audiobooks while you drive or at work. And I put a link to it right there in the episode description if you want to check it out. A couple quick reminders before you go. Check out AquaTru if you want to start filtering your water with premium 4-stage reverse osmosis water filters. They have 2 different countertop options and an under the sink option. And they recently released a shower head with their same filtration technology. AquaTru filters remove microplastics, forever chemicals, pesticides, heavy metals, and more. And they are offering listeners to this podcast $100 off when you use my special link in the episode description below. So be sure to check them out. And for the gentlemen listening to this, if you want to freshen up your underwear drawer with amazing 100% organic cotton underwear, be sure to check out NADS at nadsunder.com and use code Steven with a V for 15% off your next purchase. Links to everything in the episode description below. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next time.